the U.S.-Saudi alliance is an awkward one. For over 70 years, the U.S. has depended on Saudi Arabia for oil. But this is also the birthplace of the ultra-conservative Wahhabi branch of Islam, from which ISIS springs. It is an extremely strict interpretation of Islam. Moderate Muslims accuse Wahhabis of sanctioning violence against Christians, Jews, as well as all non-Wahhabi Muslims. In a rare interview with a Western reporter, I asked Saudi Arabia's highest religious authority, the Grand Mufti, to comment on Saudi Wahhabist teachings and Islamic extremism.
What do you say to those Americans who think that it is Saudi society and Saudi conservative Salafist beliefs that have led many to take up weapons?
السعودية ولله على منهج الكتاب والسنة ودعوة الشيخ عندها رحمه الله دعوة سلفية صالحة.
The Mufti, who is blind, insisted there is no connection between Wahhabis of Saudi Arabia and terrorism.
مجتمعنا ولله الحمد يرفض الإرهاب بكل صوره ولا يتعاون معه ويعرف حقيقة الإرهاب ونتائجه السيئة فلهذا مجتمع المسلم يرفضه رفضا كاملا.
Next, I went to speak to former intelligence chief Prince Turki Al Faisal. He admits that ISIS has roots here, but says it is an aberration.
ISIS is a cancerous growth. Cancer cells, where do they come from? They come from healthy cells in the body, but the rest of the body is healthy, and so yes, ISIS does some of the actions that can be pointed to as being similar to what we do, but we have a judicial system.
Sharia law.
Sharia law, and we're not going to give that up for anything.
The trouble is that the kind of justice often practiced here in Saudi Arabia can appear indistinguishable from Sharia justice as practiced by ISIS. Saudi Arabia is on the left, ISIS on the right.
ISIS is sort of the uber Wahhabi, if you will. They're taking the most pared down and boiled down essence of the Wahhabi sect and taking it and owning it.
I've been to Saudi Arabia, I've talked to Saudi officials. They say that they don't subscribe to this kind of extremism that ISIS represents, and they refuse to take any responsibility for, in some way, laying the groundwork or laying the seeds.
If you are looking for a smoking gun, it is going to be very hard to find the memo that tells you that ISIS is following their ideology. But if you look at the essence of what that sect of Islam is all about, it is very hard not to see that if not for this, there would not be that.
In fact, ISIS used Saudi textbooks for their schools, texts that preach hatred for all non-Wahhabi Muslims.
أما المرحلة الأولى فهي المرحلة الابتدائية ويدرس فيها الطالب 5 صفوف وبعد أن
They did not have time initially to come up with their own curricula. So conveniently, the Saudi government puts up PDFs of its textbooks online. And so ISIS just downloaded those textbooks and used them in ISIS schools.
The Saudis have revised some textbooks and say they are working on their messaging.
We're working on the counter-narrative almost every day. We're having meetings, we're having consultations with people, with experts. We have a show called Al-Ikhbariya, and on that show, people give their opinion. And one of the questions asked is that question, how can you protect your children from the ideas of ISIS or the ideas of terrorism?
Another Saudi TV show, Selfie, mocks ISIS through comedy by spoofing a mass execution.
وش سوى هالظروف المساكين؟ خاف الله يا جماعة خاف الله. وش تقول يا أبو عبد الله؟ حلال كفار وينفع فيهم الذبح. يبا وش تقول؟
Here, an ISIS fighter tries to get his father, who has come to take him home, to participate in the killing.
أبيك تكرمني وتخلي أبوي يذبح له واحدة من هالكفرة. وش تبي بس؟ اختر. وش اختر؟ نق اللي تبي. ايش رايك في هذا طيب؟ والله ما اقدر. هذا جاهز مرة. يعني لازم. اي لازم تعرف عاد شيء لازم تسويه انت.
The question I had was whether Saudi attempts at counter-messaging were making a difference. ISIS has drawn more young men from Saudi Arabia than any other Gulf state.
يا أهلنا في بلاد الحرمين نهنئكم ونهنئ أمة الإسلام عامة بهذه الانتصارات العظيمة التي تحققها دولة الإسلام في العراق وفي الشام.
Has Secretary Kerry made any progress? Has the United States made any progress in pressuring the Saudis
We've made progress in terms
change?
of publicly talking about the issue, which is a step forward. But we're just skimming on the top.
The message that gets through is still a troublesome message. It still tends to denigrate non-Muslims, Jews, and Christians. It still denigrates non-Wahhabi Muslims, especially Shia. Anyone who teaches or believes that Islam is something other than the Wahhabi version.
The problem is so deep that addressing all of the layers of intolerance in Saudi discourse is very hard. The problem is Saudi Arabia needs to do more, and American pressure to get Saudi Arabia to do more is important.
It has been frustrating for the U.S., but counter-messaging is simply not the Saudis' #1 priority. Instead, it is the kingdom's long struggle against their arch-rival, Iran. Since the founding of the Islamic Republic of Iran, Ayatollah Khomeini declared Iran to be the legitimate leader of the Muslim world. He called for an end to the Saudi monarchy. In recent years, as the U.S. began pursuing a nuclear deal with Iran, ISIS was seen as a lesser threat.
The challenge, of course, we've had in the Middle East is they all are concerned about ISIL. There is no question about that. But they don't always rank their concerns in the same order that we do. So in the Saudi case, for example, obviously I think they're focused first and foremost on the Iranian challenge.
There is not real buy-in to the anti-ISIL policy on the Saudi part. Their analysis, I believe, is that the Iranian threat is an immediate and existential one that has to be dealt with at once or all will be lost. ISIL, on the other hand, is a big problem, but it can be dealt with over time. It's much less threatening and much less urgent.